So recently on CNN, host Jake Tapper admitted to something that I have never heard a cable news host admit to before, that they essentially actively suppress progressive voices. Now, he said it casually, kind of offhand, but it was clear that he is aware of it, which makes it even worse. So watch this. And also I'll get into the comments made here from Mehdi Hassan, or I think it's Mehdi Hassan. I'm hearing two different pronunciations now. Because he comments on Bernie Sanders in the race.
We often have Democrats on the panel, but not necessarily progressives, people in the Warren Sanders camp of things. So let me ask you.
So let me just stop there. I like how he just mentions that like no big deal. Oh yeah, well, we have Democrats on here, but not normally, progressives, which are, the entire base. Like if you look at any poll, just one example, polling on Medicare for all, for Democrats, the support is 80 to 90% plus. Democrats support Medicare for all. So we're talking right now really just Bernie Sanders, because even Elizabeth Warren has clawed back her plan. So just Bernie Sanders. They don't have people representing this view of 80%, to lowball it here, of 80% of Democrats. They don't have someone on regularly to represent that view. And Jake Tapper's he just admits it. It's no big deal. It shows you that it's hard to know if it's even, if he clearly doesn't understand the implications of what he just said. He doesn't understand that that's a huge deal, that all the time they have on crazy Trump supporting Republicans. They have on moderate Republicans. They have on moderate Democrats, corporate Democrats, but they don't have on progressives. I mean, how do you not understand that is a huge deal? Now, let me go on here because Mehdi Hassan goes on to talk about what most of mainstream press right now is missing in this race.
Or in the Warren Sanders camp of things. So let me ask you, where do you see those candidacies right now? Because it looks like Elizabeth Warren has slid a little bit in the polls.
She has slid a bit, but I'm not sure how long that slide will continue. I think Bernie Sanders is the story that's not talked about enough. Nevada, New Hampshire, he's led in New Hampshire, the recent, I can't remember so many polls, Quinnipiac, he's leading in New Hampshire. Iowa, he's in the top 3. I mean, I saw Axios story saying that a different candidate could win each of the first 4 states. Right, yeah. You know what? Bernie could also win 3 of the first 4 states. It could happen. There's no reason not to. And I think that's what's interesting. We in the media are very obsessed with the athlete Pete Buttigieg, who was very impressive earlier this year, less so now, I think. And obviously Joe Biden being the front runner for a long time. But it would be madness to write off Warren and Sanders, especially if at some stage you would assume one of them gets out of the race at some stage. So, and then, does the other person pick up all those votes?
No one said is Mayor Bloomberg, right? No one said Michael.
Oh, my God. Mehdi Hassan here makes a great point, sandwiched between two ridiculous things. On one hand, Jake Tapper admitting, yeah, we don't have on progressives ever, even though it's the majority of the base, even though it may in fact be the majority of the entire voting nation. This idiot at the end, I forget his name, but this guy's always on supporting Donald Trump. Bloomberg, not talking about Michael Bloomberg. Maybe it's because he has no support. Maybe it's because only the wealthiest people in the country support Michael Bloomberg, or people that are tricked into supporting Bloomberg for whatever reason. But Mehdi Hassan makes a great point here. Bernie Sanders, of course, being largely ignored. I mean, how many examples are there of this Bernie blackout? PBS, I did a story on this. They did an 8-minute segment. PBS did an 8-minute segment on the race. At no point did they mention Bernie Sanders. 8 minutes. And Bernie's been in the top 3 in polling the entire race. He has the most donors, the most individual donors by far, the most donations by far, the most money out of anybody in the race. That used to be a huge thing too. The media always covered the money race. Why are they barely covering the money race now? It's because Bernie Sanders has smashed what the money race used to be about. It used to be about courting wealthy donors. So the media was all over that. But now the money race is actually about getting individual donors. Bernie is beating them all with individual donors. All of a sudden, money race? What money race? What are you talking about? So it's obvious. It's so obvious how they form these narratives, how they try and create certain perspectives that they push out there to put onto people. This is why you have a lot of older generation voters supporting candidates like Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, because that's what the media is pushing out there. The media, when you completely ignore a candidate like Bernie Sanders, who has a 40-year record of saying the same thing, I mean, that in itself is a huge story. How often do you see cable news bring up old Bernie clips? They never do it. But isn't that kind of important to show who this man, how he's been the same person the entire time? Why would you not show that? Because it would help to grow Bernie's support. And the corporate media establishment, the political establishment, the corporate establishment in general is against Bernie Sanders. And they don't want to say or do anything that could potentially help him. Occasionally, there'll be a story here and there. CNN had a recent segment where they talked to some voters in Kentucky who support Bernie Sanders. You know, in rare cases, they'll have moments like that. But when it comes to these roundtable discussions, when it comes to the usual Sunday morning political talk shows, he's barely ever mentioned. Even though he has the movement, he has the support base, he is the one that is best poised to defeat Trump in a general election. Every single poll that shows Bernie going up against Trump, Bernie beats Trump. And not even just national polls, state by state. So he's also the only one in the Democratic race that's out fundraising Trump. Bernie Sanders is. Yet, again, a point that gets completely lost. Bernie, again, has the most fundraising support in counties that went from Obama to Trump in 2016. Has that point been made ever on cable news? No. So there's an obvious Bernie blackout here. And I did another story. I mean, there's countless stories about this. But another story where he's leading California, and the initial LA Times headline was talking about how Biden and Warren lost support. But they didn't mention that Bernie wasn't first. And it's a pattern of behavior. This is what these headlines normally do. They know most people just read the headline, so they can get away with doing that and say, well, it's in the piece, right? You read the piece, you see it. Yeah, sure. But you know, most people have busy lives. They scroll through, they see headlines. That's what they consume. So when you leave out an important piece like, hey, Bernie Sanders is first in California, yet when you report on other candidates and their leads in various states, you name those candidates in the headline. Bernie Sanders, nope, not mentioned, but mention that Biden and Warren are dropping. Who's in first? I don't know. It's unbelievable, and it's consistent. I also just want to share this, not really related to the story, but I saw this on Twitter, and it goes to the experience that many of us don't have because there isn't this media frenzy around our identity. So Mehdi Hassan here discussing his experience with Southwest Air, saying not a good look for your flight attendant on Southwest to D.C. last night to loudly tell a brown woman in a headscarf she'll be, quote, escorted off the plane for making people feel, quote unquote, uncomfortable because she wanted to sit with her husband and kids. How many times have you been on a plane where people say, hey, do you mind switching seats? You know, I have a better seat than you do. Do you want to sit in this aisle seat while I sit between people? Like, because I want to sit with my family or whatever. Happens all the time. Somebody in a headscarf does it. All of a sudden, there's a big uproar. So he goes on here. The flight attendant called ground staff onto the plane, complained about the Muslim woman, my wife, so this is Mehdi Hassan's wife, to them and escalated rather than de-escalated the situation, simply because my wife politely asked a guy if he'd give up his seat for our family, which he was fine with. So what was the problem here? He goes on, even her own Southwest colleague from the ground staff who came on board to check things wondered why the flight attendant wouldn't shut up and let things go so we could take off. Quote unquote, why is she escalating this? A passenger from across the aisle also asked aloud. Why indeed? The Southwest Air flight attendant treated you like a venomous snake, another passenger told my wife after we landed in D.C. last night. Thanks, Southwest Air, for ruining the end of our Thanksgiving trip and leaving my wife in tears because she wanted us all to sit together as a family while your flight attendant wanted to single her out and humiliate her. Thanks a lot. And apparently, I think this is a regular thing with Southwest flight staff seem to have form when it comes to mistreating brown Muslim passengers. So this is another story about that. Unbelievable. Again, something a lot of us don't have to deal with, but it's important to understand what people in your situation have to deal with, simply because of how they look or their religion.